Jake has worked in many aspects of city government and nonprofits, and so what was I going to say? Oh, he was he was involved in the original. I can't talk in helping set up the climate protection program here at the city. So he's going to talk today about edible landscaping. And I'm hoping that some of you guys will start incorporating some edibles into your existing landscaping because, you know, we may not be able to water everything, but we're going to be able to water our food. So please welcome Jake Stewart.
That sounds like a t-shirt in the making. We may not be able to water everything, but we'll water our food. I hope to make this a little interactive, and because there's a lot of knowledge out here, and so I'd like to tap into that if y'all are willing. But I also thought we'd take just a couple minutes for a little movie opener. But just to piggyback off what she said, this is a new program that the city's doing. It's Sustainable Urban Agriculture and Community Gardens is the title. So right now it's just me. I finally got some part-time help. But the idea is, like our friends up in the Northwest in Portland and Seattle, Austin, thanks to a city council resolution last year, is taking the initiative to look at open space where we've got plots that are underutilized or not utilized, that we start looking at ways to grow food. So as a citizen, it's exciting that the city's going into that new frontier. It also means it's a collective effort. You know, this is community. It's not going to come out of just a city department, but it's working with Sustainable Food Center. It's working with all our great nonprofits, and then folks that are interested in growing food. So we get calls all the time from people that just want to start a community garden. They get 3 or 4 of their neighbors together, and next thing you know, you got food grown in your neighborhood. So I'm going to talk a little bit about landscaping and food, but I'm going to try to thread in the bigger picture because that, to me, is how it starts to kind of fit together and make sense in the long term. And I think in your collective positions that y'all are kind of on the front line of how these changes happen. When you're dealing with your customers, your clients, just suggesting subtle changes towards more sustainable landscaping, more sustainable food production. And I think we're in a time period that we really need to look at that. So this is an opener. Most of you probably know Michael Pollan. I think it's just a good framing for food in general. So I think if you unmute it and...
When we think about global warming, we think about transportation, we think about how we heat our houses. But in fact, how we eat has just as big an impact on climate change. The average item of food in America has traveled 1,500 miles from the farm to your plate. It's burned up an incredible amount of fossil fuel just to get there. If you're eating lettuce, say, in New York that's been grown in California, one of those bags of pre-washed mixed lettuce, it takes 56 calories of fossil fuel energy to deliver 1 calorie of food energy to your plate. For the consumer to understand how much energy goes into their food, I think all they have to understand is, if it's local, it's less, and if it is unprocessed. A lot of the energy in our food comes from processing. All the complicated steps needed to make a Twinkie, all use vast amounts of energy. There are a great many other benefits to eating locally besides conserving energy. There is, I think, the very important benefit of keeping farmers in business. Farmers add a lot to a community. They have great wisdom about the natural world. And then there is the view. There's a wonderful bumper sticker in Europe called Eat Your View. And the premise is that if you don't support these agricultural landscapes around you, they will be sprawled. They will be covered with houses and highways and shopping malls. And the way to keep them open is to eat from the farms that constitute that view. And that's true. I mean, that's how you preserve those agricultural landscapes, is eating from those farms.
He's kind of a thought leader and has written some great books. We'll get a soundtrack to this presentation, I guess. So I think I'd like to open with, if you have any case studies or specific experiences or even just plants that you like that happen to be edible that you've incorporated or in your own lives or in landscaping or in design, Can we throw out a few names of trees or plants that you're drawn to or have utilized that work well in this climate and maybe are drought tolerant? Okra. We love okra. It's an edible weed. Oregano. Mesquite. What do you do with mesquite? Eat the beans. Put it in salad, or you grind it up. That's a new one. Wow. It probably helps with allergies too. Any other thoughts? Lamb's quarters. How would you describe the taste of that? Spinach. Easy to grow. So, which one? Prickly pear. Awesome. Make a jelly out of the fruits. Margaritas, yeah, for sure. Peach trees, yes. Amaranth. What about the herbs? We got one herb, a couple herbs. Rosemary, garlic chives, basil. What about our tree friends? Any nuts? Which was that? Persimmons. Awesome. Pecans, yeah. So probably collectively you have a lot more knowledge, certainly a lot more knowledge than me, but part of my message is that this is a conversation that we can start. And no one has all the answers, but collectively we can start to move towards integrating food into our landscapes. And it doesn't have to be a radical shift. It can be a gradual one that's driven by consumers, actually. The amount of money one would save just with an herb spiral, which is an easy implementation. It engages the folks in their landscape and saves a lot of money over time. One of the statistics he mentioned was it takes 52 calories or 53 calories of fossil fuels to move 1 calorie of food across the country. So as we see oil prices fluctuate and as we see oil prices go up, the average piece of produce traveling 1,500 miles to get to our plate becomes a less appealing equation. So what we're doing now just in the proactive also has a component of food security that I like to emphasize in a proactive way, that we can't necessarily get all our food locally, but we should try to get as much as possible. And so a lot of that comes from farms and gardens and local growers, but I like the idea of integrating into landscapes, particularly when you look at food forests and urban orchards. Let's see. There we go. So we just talked about this, the idea of just being creative and innovative and replacing what might just be viewed as an ornamental, or finding an ornamental that happens to be edible. That's the other one. There's a lot of plants that folks don't even consider. You see sweet potato everywhere around here, but a lot of folks don't even know that's edible. And it's not that we're going to necessarily go out and serve this, but it has an effect on wildlife. It also has an effect that it is fun to forage. When you have these groups that can go around and engage their landscape in an edible way, it's the most powerful way to engage the plants, to eat them. So I'm sort of implying this, but feel free to fill in the blanks I miss. But it seems to me that the maintenance, drought tolerance, obviously here is huge. Having something that's perennial or at least aesthetically pleasing year-round, and then engaging the senses through smell and aroma, convenience, and then, to the extent we can work in chemical-free, that's part of our goal. There's also a lot of folks, as I've engaged this program and started to get it off the ground, we've gotten a lot of calls from people around the country that are interested in how we're dealing with drought. So our challenge is also something that makes us a case study for climate change or shifting climates. So I'd say nationally, folks are watching what Austin does around this space because we do have water pressures. So when we talk about re-engaging the way we grow food and re-engaging our local food system, there's lots of cities, counties, and folks that want to prepare, watching how we do it. Shade trees and shrubs and ground covers. There's a traditional school of thought, again, emphasizing a lot of you are already doing a lot of innovative stuff, which offline or after, I would love to meet you and talk with you because there's a lot that we can learn programmatically from what you're doing. I'm sure y'all can identify these. The one on the left is gone. And figs. Anybody plant figs or have figs in their yards? Yeah. You getting a lot of production out of them? What's that? Oh, feeding the birds too? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they're good at spreading their seeds. They know how to do it for sure. But figs will produce great, especially once they're established. The theme here is drought tolerance, but once you get them established, obviously any new plant, you got to give it some juice to get going. But a lot of these are very drought tolerant. One on the left is pomegranate, blackberries and blueberries. Those are pretty friendly around here. Does anybody have pomegranate going? Yeah? Is it producing? Still wee ones everywhere. Okay. Herb spiral. I mentioned this. This is a neat landscape feature that a lot of you might already be aware of, but they're great group projects. If you've got kids particularly, they can be on a small scale like this or larger. And there can be some really creative and beautiful designs. I've seen all kinds of things. I've seen meditation circles, that you walk through that happen to have herbs and plantings. And it's just a neat connection that happens where people realize they can taste the things around them. Obviously, you want to make sure everything's non-toxic that's within reach once they get in that mode, or at least walk with them, because sometimes colors can be a draw. But most of these are drought tolerant that are listed there. And it's pretty remarkable how much money you can save over a year having organic fresh herbs available. You recognize the one on the left? Sweet potato, yeah. Anybody? Well, this is just a variety of lettuces, but I like to point out that when you're doing local lettuce like that, even in your backyard, that's beautiful, and you can integrate that. But the amount of water that's saved by growing locally is 3 to 4 times what it would take in conventional agriculture to produce that same unit of food. So we sort of think of in the local context, but in the global context, we're saving a significant amount of water by doing that. And then you integrate more innovative concepts like hydroponics and aquaponics, which we have some projects in Austin that are going off on that. And now you're talking about saving 80 to 90% of the water input. So that conversation is going to continue. Anybody recognize the one on the left? Porridge. Have you eaten that? Anybody tasted it? The flowers are quite tasty. They have kind of like a nutty taste. These are all edible flowers. Dandelions. And I think that's calendula I put on the bottom right. Any other edible flowers y'all know of? Which one? Nasturtium's awesome. Super spicy, or kind of spicy. Put it on a salad. Which one? Calendula, yep. What was that one? Redbud. I've never tried that. Just pick the whole flower. Spicy or? Just tastes like a flower. What was the other one? Pogonia, yeah. Ooh, yum. What is it? Pumpkin, yeah. Yeah. Sort of sweet, right? No? Bitter? What is it? For quesadillas. So this is also, for those of y'all that have a little bit of an entrepreneur, a green entrepreneur side, these go for top dollar at these restaurants around here. And as far as I know, no one's locally really focused on growing edible flowers. They're brought in. So just to throw that out there, there's also, when we talk about this is the new market. And to the extent it can be a sustainable one, that's our goal. So if you have a green thumb and some time and a greenhouse or something, you might consider, talking to some of the restaurants and seeing what they need and growing it. Do we have any self-identified permaculturists in here? Good. Well, so it's kind of a loose term, and I'm sure most of you have heard about it, but I'm seeing it increasingly integrated with landscape design. And in its broadest sense, it just means, integrating sustainable components and observing where you can work with the natural landscape when you can. we've got about 7 community gardens that we're actively going for right now that are either on the drawing board or in process. And one of these, we're going to integrate a food forest. So it'll be the first one that I know of in the city. And when I say food forest, I don't just mean an urban orchard. I'm talking about the layering that goes into a food forest. So you've got ground cover, you've got shrub level, you've got canopy, and then you've got the vertical of vines and then soil growth. So the idea of maximizing food production and mimicking a natural forest system is the idea. So minimal water inputs, minimal fertilizer inputs, minimal compost inputs, because when you think about a forest, we're not bringing mulch into a forest. It cycles itself. It has its own closed loops. So there's a lot to be learned by what we observe already in nature that they've figured out. There's one, I guess it's an analogy, that the idea that a lot of times we spend a lot of inputs modifying our pH of soil, either through fertilizer or through amendments to the soil. But when you think about it from a seed perspective or a forest, you can plant an acid-loving plant next to a base-loving plant in most healthy systems. And the reason that is because the soil naturally stratifies into its pH. The seed knows this. Well, it doesn't know that it knows this, but it's had a lot of time to figure out how to adapt to these environments. So it simply establishes its root system at that pH level that it likes. So when we come in and churn it up, we now create a system that we've constantly got to input in. Not to say that we shouldn't be, I'm a very integrative approach person, so it's not that we should all just let things grow completely unchecked, but these are things that are interesting to think about when we talk about costs of input and maintenance over the long term. And I just wanted to put this up. Do we have landscape architects in here too? Okay, awesome. So increasingly, the landscape architects are playing, I'm seeing a big role for them in the design of these community gardens. It's not just the traditional model of a 2-acre square with other squares inside of it. People are getting really creative about this. This is a project that's off of it's a bait and loop buyout is what they call it. It's off of Cherry Creek, south near Madam Mams, back in there. And they had an area that was bought out, all the houses were cleared, and it was kind of an eyesore. So a group of folks got together and said, well, why don't we put a community garden in? And so we've been working on that. And my suggestion to them was, rather than just that group design the garden, that they put out an open call. And they put out an open call and got incredible designs back. I didn't even see it, but just this is a really ripe topic right now, and people want to be involved. So this is probably one of the more beautiful community garden designs I've seen, and it just came up organically out of that. So now they're working on funding, and we're helping to pull those pieces together. So from a landscape architect standpoint, I see opportunities in that. I see the need for that that integrative eye to aesthetically pull things together. And then you need folks on the ground that know how to deal with the plants. Our master gardener community has been helpful, and I'm sure all of you know that number, that 800 number to call if you have any direct questions about food-producing plants. So that's sort of the community garden side. There's one other one that I wanted to mention just for this group. It's at the North Austin Recreation Center that we're doing with the YMCA. We put out an open call for an artist to design the community garden, and that's the first time that I know of that an artist has sort of been commissioned to do it, and it's through the Art in Public Places program. And the idea is, how do you mix form with function? How do you make a compost pile beautiful? How do you make irrigation engaging for a kid to water plants? So sort of watch the space on that one. I think that's going to be a really neat project. The community is very involved, and to see where art mixes with food production, you get a really sort of a deep swirl of community, and I think that's really the appeal of the community garden side. On the other side, we've got the sustainable urban agriculture component that we're building right now. We just submitted a big grant to USDA around food security. It's a $5 million grant that we, if we get it, in collaboration with some of the universities and Sustainable Food Center, would look at ways to grow food in open space, collaboration of the city with community. So this is more production focused. So the idea is, how do we really engage things like floodplains, things that are underutilized lands, to grow crops that require minimal input. So I'm throwing all this out there because this is a new space, and to the extent you're interested in this, please talk to me, because there's a lot more projects than I can sort of engage right now. So part of what we're doing with this program is connecting dots. There's someone over here who's interested in aquaponics. There's someone here that's doing mulch and compost, and so we connect them if they have open space that needs to be connected around that. I know we got to make up some time, so I'll just take a couple questions. I'm happy to answer questions about the program or where we're going to go as well, or open comments. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. So we had there was a graduate. Oh, the question was, what types of plants might you put in a food forest, and the ones that we're looking at some of the community gardens. For that particular project, we had an intern in the forestry department that's a graduate student at Texas State. And he actually put together a design with local edibles. And yes, it starts with your fruit and nut trees and then moves into some of the things we covered, like your blackberries and shrubs, but again, with an eye towards the aesthetic and engaging the system. And then you get to the lower levels of herbs and ground cover and shrubs that produce food, some of which are not actually bearing like fruits per se, but they may have an edible use. So it could be a tea. It could be, so it's not all necessarily fruits and vegetables. You have that full engagement. But the idea is to plant it in a way that sustains the system. So you've got nitrogen fixers at the lower level, just like a forest. And there's tons of really interesting models, particularly in the Northwest, on how to do this. Not as much in this area, which is an opportunity, because we have a different sort of proverbial landscape that we can work with on plants. But I'm happy to share that design with you after, too. It's really neat. Yes? Great. Yes. The question was, if you've got an area that you want to consider doing, were you saying city-owned? Yeah. If there's a city-owned property and you're interested in starting a community garden, what are the steps? We're about to launch online presence that'll capture this, but effectively, right now, you can call us and we'll help you get started. And by us, I mean me and another part-time person. But what we don't have in resources, we're making up for with enthusiasm. So, yes, the idea would be that first we need to make sure the property's available and open, and we've identified some properties around the city that sort of have an initial clearance, so if you give us your area, then maybe we can talk about, where that is. And then once we identify that it's open, there's a process that we have of sort of nonprofit sponsorship and that kind of thing, which is easy to do. We can put all those connections together. But yeah, if you've got land around you and you've got community, that's the other thing that I would recommend is at least get 2 or 3 neighbors that are with you to start the conversation, because it's really hard when it's just one person. And you'd be surprised how many people are really interested in this concept, because the community garden is more than just food production. It's a security function for the neighborhood. It's neighbors talking to neighbors. You get kids involved. You get nonprofits involved. And it really becomes a neat feature for the neighborhood. A couple more questions, real quick. Saw a hand up over here somewhere. Yes, sir. Yeah, so right now it's housed in the Parks Department. This is the program and the initiative comes out of a city council resolution about a year ago. So yes, we're in PARD right now because that's where all the land is and that's where it makes sense. But we work closely with the Office of Sustainability, and it's kind of got its own legs as a program. No, great point. So the question was, it's not just parklands, and no, it's not just PARD land. The idea is to find open space that's underutilized regardless of where it is. And if the department gives clearance to use it, then we can start the conversation for it. Yes. Yes, I'll put out a stack of cards. That's probably the easiest, and I'll just make sure to get you one. And we'll grab these last two questions. Yes, ma'am. Great question. She asked who pays for the water. So part of this initiative is to help with things like tap fees and some of the upfront costs. So we've got some tools through ordinances that allow us to help mitigate some of those costs of the initial setup. But once the water's flowing, it is the responsibility of the community guard to do it. And typically they do that. They sort of divide it amongst the plots, and it's not too costly when you do that. Each garden is sort of its own mini government, if you will. It's a leadership team, and so I like to leave a lot of space for them to come up with their own guidelines and agreements. It tends to work best like that. But yeah, there's some mitigated water costs that help out a lot. One more question. Yes, ma'am. Great question. So the question is watering during the drought and watering restrictions. So typically during the water restrictions, hand watering is always still on the table. If we get into extreme scenarios, I think there's some measures, but that's an important thing to remember. So when you're at home watering your garden, typically not an issue. Where we come into the challenges, of course, is when we talk about automated systems and irrigation systems. That's where the water department understandably puts a lot of emphasis on making sure that there's not broken pipes and restrictions around that. There is a alternative compliance that we've established for gardens that are recognized for sustainable food production. So if you have a community garden and you're having challenges with watering restrictions, come talk to me because we can work out an alternative compliance. This is also for the small farms that can't go 4 days without watering. So that's their business, their livelihood. So we have made, and I want to give water conservation some credit for the work they did on that, because there's a lot of pressures on this, and everybody's got an ask, but they found a way to do it for something that has real value to the community. So with that, I'll be around for a little bit, and I'll pull out some cards, and thanks for pulling together a great program, and thanks for listening.